Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine everything you thought you knew about who can experience pregnancy. Well, imagine it's being completely revolutionized. What if that fundamental biological line is about to blur or maybe even disappear entirely?
Yeah, and what's fascinating here really is that this isn't just a thought experiment anymore, is it? What felt like pure science fiction, just a few decades ago is, well, it's rapidly transitioning into a subject of serious scientific inquiry, and in some ways, real-world possibility.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a concept that challenges some of our most fundamental ideas about biology, gender, identity, the possibility, and sometimes the very present reality of male pregnancy. We've got this stack of sources you've provided, articles, some groundbreaking research papers, personal accounts, notes, and our mission today is basically to slice through it all. We want to pull out the essential insights and really try to understand this, well, this complex frontier where science, society, and gender are all meeting.
And the thing is, advances in reproductive technology, they aren't really waiting for societal norms to catch up. They are actively pushing the boundaries of what's biologically possible. And this is happening at the same time as our understanding of gender is evolving.
For sure. And the sources, they really paint a rich picture of this shift. We're going to explore the significant biological hurdles,
Yeah.
the incredible technological leaps trying to overcome them, look at the real world examples happening right now, and then sort of grapple with the profound social and psychological implications this all brings up.
Yeah.
It's a big topic, yeah, but one that really demands we rethink some very, very deeply ingrained assumptions. So let's start with the core idea, maybe, and why it feels so disruptive. When we talk about male pregnancy here, the sources are covering the possibility for cisgender men. So individuals assigned male at birth who identify as male but also transgender men, or non-binary individuals with physiology often categorized as male.
And right away, this concept just confronts traditional views head on. Because pregnancy has, well, for basically all of human history, been linked inextricably with women. That biological capacity specifically, having a uterus and all the related structures, that's been the defining factor.
Right, and that's exactly why the idea often gets that reaction. Surprise, maybe confusion, even skepticism. Our societal norms, our language, it's all equated pregnancy with femininity for millennia. It's just embedded in culture.
But that millennial narrative is, well, it's rapidly being rewritten, and it's by two powerful forces that your sources really highlight. First, major developments in medical science, and second, the critical importance of recognizing and understanding shifting perspectives on gender identity itself.
And crucially, your sources really underscore that this isn't just academic theory. Real-world examples are actually happening, particularly among transgender men. And alongside that, you've got these emerging technologies like artificial wombs. These factors together are making male pregnancy feel like a tangible prospect, not just some, distant hypothetical.
It really forces us to examine fundamental ideas about gender itself, doesn't it? And how we structure families, and just the potential scope of human reproductive experience. It's a challenge to the status quo on multiple levels.
It absolutely is. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the biological side, starting with the monumental challenges, specifically for cisgender men. The primary biological hurdle, and your sources emphasize this again and again, is the complete absence of the structures you need for gestation. The uterus, fallopian tubes, cervix, and also that complex network of blood vessels unique to the female pelvis that supports pregnancy. It's just not there.
Exactly. And the uterus, it isn't just an empty space, right? It's this incredibly dynamic organ. It's specifically evolved to provide a nurturing environment. It builds a thick lining every month, and crucially, it supports the placenta, the organ that handles the whole exchange of nutrients, oxygen, waste, everything between the parent and the fetus. Without a uterus, that fundamental life support system is just missing.
Okay, and then there's the hormonal barrier too.
Yep. Male bodies typically run on a hormonal profile dominated by testosterone. Pregnancy, though, it needs high sustained levels of estrogen and progesterone. These hormones build and maintain the uterine lining, they prevent contractions. Male bodies just don't naturally produce these at the necessary levels.
So it sounds almost impossible from that perspective.
Well, this is precisely where the cutting-edge science is focusing its efforts. The big question researchers are tackling is, how can we replicate or somehow compensate for these missing biological pieces?
And your sources outline a few scientific approaches. One that's actually already seen success in some contexts is uterine transplantation.
Yes, exactly. This procedure is already a reality for individuals born without a uterus, conditions like MRKH syndrome, or for those who've had their uterus removed for medical reasons. The sources highlight that pioneering work, like the Swedish team back in 2014. They achieved the first successful live birth from a transplanted uterus in a woman. That was huge.
Right, a massive breakthrough for cisgender women. But transplanting a uterus into a male body, that would need significant, really complex modifications, wouldn't it? The plumbing, as you said, is just different.
Exactly. The vascular connections getting the blood vessels needed to supply that transplanted uterus is probably the most significant anatomical challenge. The arrangement, the size of the vessels in the male pelvis are just different from the female pelvis. You'd need really intricate surgical techniques to create functional connections strong enough to support a pregnancy. And then beyond the surgery itself, you'd need intensive hormonal treatments to completely override the natural male hormonal profile. You'd have to mimic those high estrogen and progesterone levels needed to maintain the pregnancy and, importantly, prevent rejection of the transplanted organ.
So, theoretically possible, maybe, but still feels highly experimental. And there are massive medical and ethical hurdles still. Like, can the male body actually sustain the weight, the physiological demands? What about the long-term effects on the person receiving the transplant? These seem like major open questions.
Precisely. Sustaining a full-term pregnancy in a male body presents physiological challenges we haven't really encountered before. Think about musculoskeletal stress, cardiovascular strain. And that's not even mentioning the risks that come with the necessary immunosuppressant drugs you'd need to take to prevent organ rejection.
Okay, okay. So uterine transplantation is one avenue, though a very complex one. Another approach, which sounds even more futuristic, is the development of artificial wombs.
Ectogenesis, right?
Right, ectogenesis. This refers to creating external environments. You can think of it like a sophisticated biobag or a chamber designed specifically to replicate the conditions inside a uterus. The idea is that a fetus could potentially develop entirely outside the body.
And there's been some pretty significant proof of concept work here already, hasn't there? The sources mentioned that key 2017 study. Yes, that was the team at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They hit a major milestone by successfully growing lamb fetuses in their artificial womb system for 4 weeks. And these weren't tiny embryos. They were at a stage equivalent to about a 23-week human fetus, a point where survival outside the womb is often impossible. That study basically showed that maintaining a premature mammal in an external environment is, well, achievable in principle.
Wow. So for men, this technology could potentially bypass the need for a uterus altogether. You could fertilize an egg outside the body, then transfer the embryo to one of these artificial wombs. Your sources point to this as a potential game changer, really decoupling gestation from specific biological anatomy.
It could be. But scaling that technology up from a premature lamb to supporting a full-term human fetus for 9 months, that's an absolutely massive undertaking. The nutritional needs, the respiratory support, waste removal, it all becomes incredibly complex over that length of time. And, as the sources definitely note, this technology raises huge ethical questions. Questions about the definition of birth, the parent-child bond, the potential for, commercializing gestation. Lots to think about there.
Definitely. And let's just circle back quickly to hormones. Even if you had a transplanted uterus or maybe an artificial womb, you'd still need those high levels of estrogen and progesterone somehow, right? For the body, with the transplant.
Correct. Introducing and maintaining those necessary high levels of female hormones in a male body would profoundly disrupt the natural hormonal balance. While hormonal therapies exist for other reasons, sustaining pregnancy levels long-term poses unique challenges and potential side effects. Your sources bring up concerns like significant bone density loss, maybe increased risk of blood clots, potential long-term cardiovascular issues.
So while research into safer, maybe more targeted or reversible hormonal therapies is ongoing, the sources make it pretty clear there are still significant biological and medical hurdles to clear for cisgender men to safely carry a pregnancy, even with a transplant.
Absolutely. And this is precisely why the real-life case studies become so vital to this whole discussion. Because while full cisgender male pregnancy via transplantation might be a future prospect, transgender men have already shown us that male pregnancy is absolutely a reality in certain contexts, and it's happening right now.
That's such a critical distinction, and yeah, your sources really highlight it. We're talking about individuals assigned female at birth who identify as male but who have retained the internal reproductive organs usually associated with female anatomy, so a uterus and ovaries.
Exactly. Because they possess those necessary biological structures, they can conceive and carry a pregnancy. This can happen either naturally if they're still producing eggs, or maybe more commonly through assisted reproductive technologies like IUI intrauterine insemination, where sperm is placed directly into the uterus.
And the most famous example, the one everyone knows, is probably Thomas Beattie. The sources all cite him. The media dubbed him the pregnant man back in, 2008. He'd undergone parts of his gender transition, like hormone therapy and chest surgery. But crucially, he kept his uterus and ovaries, and he went on to give birth to 3 children. His story, controversial as it was then, definitely pushed this conversation into the mainstream.
Absolutely. His case and the experiences of many other transgender men who've carried pregnancies since then powerfully demonstrate the biological feasibility when the necessary anatomy is present. But maybe even more significantly, these stories really underscore the immense social and emotional challenges involved.
What kind of challenges do the sources talk about there?
Well, stigma is a huge one. Carrying a pregnancy while identifying as male just defies these deeply ingrained societal norms and expectations about gender. So, pregnant trans men often face misunderstanding, intrusive questions, judgment, sometimes even outright discrimination. And this can come from strangers, sure, but also, quite disturbingly, from healthcare providers who might lack the right training or awareness. This can really complicate getting appropriate prenatal care and adds just immense stress.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Navigating the medical system, which is so heavily gendered towards women for pregnancy care, must be incredibly difficult.
It really is. Just finding healthcare providers who are knowledgeable, respectful, and affirming can be a significant hurdle in itself. And beyond that, there's the internal psychological journey. While carrying a child can be incredibly affirming for many trans men, a way to build their family. For some, the physical changes of pregnancy, well, they can sometimes conflict with their male identity. It might lead to feelings of gender dysphoria. That's why support systems are so crucial. Things like online communities, organizations like Transbirth that your sources mentioned, they provide spaces for sharing experiences and finding coping strategies. Access to mental health support alongside medical care is vital.
So these real-life examples, they really show us that male pregnancy isn't just some abstract scientific puzzle for the future. It's a deeply personal reality for many people right now, and it requires, immediate societal understanding and support.
Precisely. And building on that point about technology, let's maybe revisit how some recent breakthroughs are bringing the potential for male pregnancy closer to reality for an even broader group, possibly including cisgender men down the line.
Okay, yeah. We talked about artificial wombs, ectogenesis. The sources seem to frame this as one of the most significant frontiers.
Yeah, if it could be perfected for full human gestation, this technology could fundamentally decouple reproduction from biological sex, maybe even from carrying a pregnancy inside a body at all. It could potentially allow anyone, male, female, non-binary, couples who can't carry or choose not to have a child gestated externally. It's still very early days for human applications, but the potential implications are just staggering.
And uterine transplantation is also still being actively explored for men, despite those significant anatomical hurdles we discussed, the different pelvic structure, blood supply.
Research is definitely ongoing, including studies in animal models, like mice, specifically looking at how a male body could be prepared, surgically and hormonally, to accept and maybe sustain a pregnancy in a transplanted uterus. Scientists are investigating things like creating new vascular connections, developing specific hormone regimens tailored for a male system. It's a complex work.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, potentially revolutionary, according to your sources. In vitro gametogenesis, IVG.
Right. IVG. This is the science of creating viable eggs or sperm cells from other cells in the body, specifically from stem cells. So instead of needing to retrieve eggs from ovaries or sperm from testes, you could potentially take, say, a skin cell, reprogram it into a stem cell, and then guide that stem cell to develop into either a sperm or an egg right there in a lab dish.
Wow, and the potential impact of that, especially thinking about male pregnancy, seems immense.
Oh, absolutely. If it becomes successful and safe in humans, IVG could allow individuals to create embryos without needing a partner of the opposite sex for the gametes. For same-sex male couples, it could mean both partners might potentially contribute genetic material using their own reprogrammed cells. For a cisgender man, if you combine that with an artificial womb, or maybe surrogacy, it could allow him to be a genetic parent, maybe even experience a form of gestation via ectogenesis. There's actually a recent study, I think, in Nature in 2024 that made significant progress. They successfully generated viable egg cells from male mouse cells, and those resulted in live offspring when fertilized. Now, translating that to humans is a huge leap, but it hints at incredible future possibilities.
Incredible is right. But these kinds of groundbreaking technologies, especially IVG and artificial wombs, they obviously raise huge, complex ethical debates, too. The sources touch on concerns about things like designer babies, the potential for selecting traits if we're creating embryos entirely in a lab, or the commercialization of reproduction. Could these technologies become something only the wealthy can afford?
These are critical questions for society, absolutely. And they aren't purely scientific questions. They're about access, equity, fundamental human values. How do we make sure these technologies, if they become widespread, are available equitably? What are the boundaries we should set when we're talking about altering the very process of creating human life? It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And these questions lead us right into the broader societal and cultural challenges that the whole prospect of male pregnancy presents.
Because this concept, it fundamentally challenges these deeply ingrained gender roles and expectations that have been reinforced for, well, centuries. Pregnancy is just so deeply woven into cultural narratives of womanhood, motherhood, femininity. The idea of men carrying babies, it disrupts those traditional binary notions right at their core.
How would society even begin to adapt to something so disruptive? Your sources bring up some really practical but also symbolic questions like, would parental leave policies, which have historically been framed around maternity, need to expand universally to cover male pregnancy? How would workplaces, schools, even your own extended family react and accommodate a pregnant man?
Well, these shifts, they have the potential to powerfully challenge stereotypes about who is capable of nurturing and parenting. They could maybe foster more inclusive, more flexible understandings of family. But let's be realistic, they also risk provoking significant resistance from individuals and groups who hold very rigid views about biological sex, gender roles, and reproduction.
Right. Social acceptance feels like a massive barrier here. It's not just about whether the science can work, it's about whether people will accept it. The sources mention things like that 2023 Pew Research study showing that while younger generations seem more open to evolving ideas about gender and family, a significant chunk of the population still holds those more traditional, rigid views, especially when it comes to biological roles like pregnancy.
And that lack of acceptance translates into real-world problems. Pregnant men, whether they're transgender now or potentially cisgender in the future, could face significant discrimination, misunderstanding in all parts of life. This is why public education is just paramount, helping people understand the realities and possibilities beyond their ingrained biases. And policy changes are crucial too. Things like developing truly inclusive healthcare protocols, using gender-neutral language in prenatal care settings, making sure forms and procedures aren't exclusively female-centric. It's all about improving access and reducing stigma.
Okay, so beyond the big societal reaction, there are also significant psychological and social implications on a much more personal level, right? For the individuals actually involved.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological impact would likely vary a lot depending on the person's situation. For transgender men who carry pregnancies, as we touched on, it can be incredibly empowering, fulfilling a deep desire for parenthood. But like we said, the physical changes can be challenging. Navigating body image, shifts, a growing belly, maybe lactation that can sometimes clash with their male gender identity, potentially triggering dysphoria. Access to mental health support alongside medical care is just critical. And those support groups we mentioned are so important.
And then for cisgender men, if pregnancy became a widespread possibility for them,
Yeah.
that would require entirely new psychological frameworks, wouldn't it? We just don't have cultural scripts for male pregnancy.
Exactly. How would a cis man relate to the physical experience of carrying a fetus? How would bonding happen compared to our traditional expectations? Preparing for parenthood would take on totally new dimensions. And they might face unique psychological pressures too, like intense societal scrutiny, maybe expectations to conform to certain ideas of masculinity by, toughing it out
Mhm.
through physical discomfort in ways pregnant women haven't historically been expected to.
Socially, though, male pregnancy could profoundly reshape family dynamics beyond just who carries the child. Those traditional roles of mother and father could really blur, maybe even dissolve into more flexible, perhaps more egalitarian parenting models, especially thinking about same-sex male partnerships or single men using these technologies.
And our legal systems would absolutely have to play catch-up, ensuring equal rights for pregnant men, everything from parental leave to healthcare access, legal recognition of parentage, that would all be essential. Even the design of public spaces might need to evolve. Think about restrooms, changing rooms, accommodating individuals who don't fit the traditional gendered expectations for pregnancy.
So, considering all of this, the biology, the tech, the real-life cases, the societal stuff, where is this journey heading? What does the future of male pregnancy really look like, based on what we're seeing?
Well, based on your forces, this future seems to be advancing, maybe faster than a lot of people realize. While yes, full uterine transplantation or widespread artificial wombs for cisgender men might still be some time away, maybe decades, the experiences of transgender men are already pushing the boundaries today. They're challenging what society understands as male pregnancy and forcing us to confront norms right now.
The sources even included some interesting predictions, didn't they? Some experts thinking we might see significant progress in ectogenesis technology by as early as 2030, potentially making external gestation a more feasible option, and by extension, bringing the possibility of male pregnancy closer for a broader range of people.
And these advancements, they aren't happening in a vacuum, are they? They demand that society actively confronts these complex, ethical, legal, cultural questions head on. We really can't afford to wait for the technology to be perfected before we start having these crucial conversations.
The broader implications, though, are just incredibly thought-provoking when you step back. This could fundamentally redefine gender itself, couldn't it? Moving away from such rigid biological roles in reproduction towards a more fluid understanding of who can be a parent and how families are formed.
It really could.
Ah,
It might also foster a deeper level of empathy, maybe understanding across gender lines, if men were to experience a physiological process historically exclusive to women. But achieving that more inclusive future, it requires continued investment in the science, yes, but also robust, open public dialogue and the development of policies that truly support diverse family structures.
So to sort of bring this deep dive to a close then, the possibility of men getting pregnant, it's clearly no longer just pure fantasy. It's not just science fiction anymore. It is a rapidly evolving frontier where science, gender, and society are intersecting in these profound and, yeah, sometimes challenging ways.
From the incredible scientific efforts pushing boundaries with uterine transplants, artificial wombs, to the very real, very human experiences of transgender men showing what's possible. Right now, the whole journey is complex, it's multifaceted, and it's happening right in front of us.
The challenges are significant, no doubt biological, social, psychological. But your sources also really illuminate the incredible opportunities this opens up. Opportunities to redefine what it means to be human, maybe, to create different kinds of families, and hopefully build a more inclusive and understanding society.
And navigating this uncharted territory, it really requires, probably above all else, open-mindedness, a willingness to question old assumptions, and a commitment to ongoing education. It seems like the only way we can hope to embrace a future where pregnancy might truly transcend traditional gender boundaries.
You know, this deep dive is just one example of how exploring new ideas, no matter how challenging they might seem at first, can dramatically expand our understanding of the world. And if you're curious about more fascinating topics like this one, covering everything from, cutting-edge science and tech to the latest societal trends, you really should subscribe to Mind Expansion Daily. It's honestly a great way to get information and discover surprising insights delivered right to you, helping you stay well-informed on a huge range of subjects. Just a thought.
Definitely worth checking out. And maybe as you go about your day, consider this final provocative thought we can leave you with. How might our understanding of gender itself continue to evolve as these possibilities, things once considered unthinkable, become more widespread? What other traditional assumptions about gender roles might we need to start questioning next?